Cars Garage. In this video, I'll be assembling the XRAY XB2C 22 edition. Let's get started. So I got bag 3 in the chassis. So let's open it up. Got a lot of parts in this bag, so I'm gonna put it in my plate. Make sure nothing rolls off the table. All right, so we're gonna be setting this up for carpet. All right, so on page 5 of the manual, it says something about graphite's part preparation. It basically says for the front and rear shock tower to sand all the edges with fine sandpaper and then apply CA glue to all the edges to reinforce it and to help prevent delamination. I'm not gonna do that just because I think aesthetically it's not gonna look as pleasing. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip that step for now. We're gonna go ahead and install the holders for the pills. One is, I don't know what they call them, but one is labeled RR, one is labeled RF. I believe the RR is going to be this one with the X-ray logo on it, and the other one is going to be the other piece that has no name on it. Note the orientation. There is a slight bevel on the bottom edge here on one side and not on the other. The bevel is going to be facing towards the back of the car. And we're going to use 2 M3x8 countersunk screws. So the screws are going to look like that. So we need 2 of those. And since these are going into aluminum, we're going to add a little bit of thread locker. And it'll be a 2mm hex driver. Okay. And the initial toe in and anti-squat is 3 degrees toe in and 2 degrees anti-squat. So it looks like we need to install these pills here that has the 1 and the dot in the corner. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 of those off. Go ahead and trim any excess. So it looks like when we install these pills, the 1 or the dot is going to be facing inside and be on the bottom. Yeah, so the dot will be facing the inside bottom. So on this side, it'll be like so. See if I can get that on camera. So the dot is on the inside, on the bottom of the chassis. It's in this corner here. And for this piece, it's going to be installed in the same manner. It's going to use the 1 with the dot in the corner. Okay, so we've got the X-ray logo. The 1 is going to be facing, the dot is on the inside bottom. So again, the dot is on the inside bottom. And so if you look on the back side, you'll notice that the holes, or the actual where the pin's going to go is going to be towards the inside bottom. So we can set that piece aside for now. Now we can go ahead and install the rear shock tower onto the transmission. The top shaft is here. It's going to install like so. And we're going to need 2 M3x10 screws and 2 M3x16 screws. So go ahead and use your manual to measure the screws so you have the right one. So the M3x16 go in the lower holes. So the M3x16s are going to go in the lower holes, here and here. And then the M3x10s are going to go in these two holes here and here. So we can go ahead and install that. And you're going to use a 2mm driver. Alright, so don't need to tighten it too much. You don't want to strip out the plastic. But I did notice that when tightening these down, the gap that was between these two parts has closed. But once you feel it kind of snug up, you're good. Next, what we're going to do is make sure that the transmission spins freely, and it does. So now we can move on to installing the wing mounts. So we're going to need these two wing mounts, and they're going to install like so. So the initial setting is going to be in, you have 5 holes here, and the initial setting is going to be in the middle holes, these 2 holes here. So it's going to be in the second one from the bottom and the second one from the top on both sides. And in order to install those, we are going to use 4 M3x10 screws. And these screws are going to be 2mm for your hex. And this is the rear of the car. So you're going to install like so. And remember, you're going into plastic, so you don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it shoulders up, you're good. And what's nice about these holes is that it looks like there's a slight counterbore that helps guide this screw in. Although it's a very small detail, it actually does help quite a bit. Now we can go ahead and install the rear transmission assembly onto the chassis. So front of the car, rear of the car, this is going to be facing the front, and the wing mounts are going to be facing the rear, just like so. And we're going to need, like I said, 6 M3x8 countersunk screws. Alright, so one thing to note, on the bottom of the transmission there's this square profile, and that actually sits inside this milled pocket here on the back of the transmission. So once you can line that up and it kind of fits inside, you know that it's where it exactly needs to be, and you can just kind of hold it there firmly and install the screws. It's a pretty neat design feature, so thought I'd point it out. And remember, you're going into plastic, so you don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it shoulders up, you're good. Okay. Now, since we just screwed into the transmission, I want to check to make sure everything is still spinning smoothly, and it is. None of that caused any binding, so we can move on. So next, we need to install the rear arms. And the arms say right, or R and L for right and left. Okay, so we have our hinge pins. Next, we need to get 2mm washers. Or they're called shims. They're 3 by 6.5 by 2. So on these sprues, I believe this is the 2mm washer that we need. So we can go ahead and get those out. And before I install these hinge pins, I'm gonna polish them up. All right, so I'm gonna use Never Dull. Just get a piece of that. How I'm gonna polish these is basically just lightly chuck it up in my drill and then use the Never Dull to polish it as I'm rotating the drill. I'm just gonna use a microfiber towel, just wipe it down. But it definitely feels a lot smoother than the one that I haven't done yet. So may not be necessary, but since I'm here, I might as well do it. So we add the 2mm spacer and then install the hinge pin and the control arm, and then we can install the hinge pin into the pill in the front. And now we can install the rear piece. Remember, the X-ray is going to be facing the outside. And then we have to install 2 shims. Looks like 2 aluminum shims that are 3 by 6 by 2mm. So these 2 shims will go in between the metal X-ray piece and the rear transmission. And we need 2 M3 by 12 screws. Okay, so you can see we've got the screw, the X-ray facing normally, and then we've got the 2mm shim between this metal piece and the transmission case. So you can go ahead and tighten this down. So 2mm. So it does not move freely, and we do not want that. So we're going to take apart the rear and figure out what we can do to make this move freely. It should be able to just fall under its own weight. If I'm just holding it here, they should be just like that. So you don't want that stiction because that's adding unnecessary friction to your suspension, which is going to change the way that it reacts and handles. So let's go ahead and take this back apart. The pills are seated all the way. So it looks like we might need to sand down the shims. So after measuring these shims, these aren't actually the shims that we're supposed to be using. I noticed this and I thought it was kind of interesting and kind of weird, but it looks like this is the shim that we need. It's actually molded into the arm. So let's go ahead and get that out. I don't see it being for any other reason to be in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut those off. And that is the shim that we need by measuring it. Be careful when trying to trim this because the part is very small. You don't want the X-Acto knife to slip and cut you. These shims are still kind of thick, so I can go ahead and sand these down. So what I'm going to use to sand down is actually a nail file. This is one of the things I use when building models. So I have it near my work area, so I decided I'm going to go ahead and use this. It's a nice way to have like a coarse side and a fine side. So, and it's easy to sand on it because you can just kind of put your finger on it and move it back and forth. And I just took off 0.1 millimeter. So you can see how that will work. So I took off 0.1 millimeter from both sides, and we can install this and see how it fits. All right, just starting to screw these in. Could tell that more needs to be sanded off. So you want these to move freely, and you can see that they're not. So I think it's better that you sand down those spacers or shims, because if you sand down the arm and you end up breaking one, then you're gonna have to sand your new ones if you have to replace it, and you don't want to do that in the middle of a race weekend. So I'll go ahead and try to sand off some more. Okay, got another 0.1 millimeters off. All right, and that's exactly what you want right there. Make sure that the suspension moves nice and free under its own weight. So I took off 0.2 millimeters from each one, and they both move nice and smooth, so we can move forward. So now we're going to assemble the axles and hubs. So notice that some of these still have some of the flashing or some nubs from the sprues that they were probably on. So I'm going to go ahead and trim those. Okay. These two are ready. They look like they're bi-directional, so it doesn't matter which side they go on. We are going to use a 10 by 15 by 4 bearing, which is one of the large ones. We're going to install on the back side of these hubs, and then you're going to have bearings that have black rubber covers. They're going to go on the other side. So now we can put together the axle. And what you're going to need is this axle, one of these, and then a pin. We're going to add a little bit of the graphite grease to help lubricate it. So just put a little dab of grease on there, and then you can install. And as you're installing, rotate to get that grease 360 degrees where that pin is going to be. So I installed that piece, and what you're going to want to do is you want to line up the hole that's inside. And then when you install this piece, you want to line up the hole in here with the hole in that pin, like such. And then you can install the pin that holds them all together, just like that. Okay. So now what you do is you install it like so, and that pin is held in by the bearing. So next we can take another one of the pins and install it on the little stub axle, like so. And we're going to install your wheel hex with the small socket head screw. It's a M2 by 5 millimeter. This is going to take a 1.5 millimeter driver, and do not put Loctite on this even though it's going into metal, because you don't want to strip this out, because if you do, it's a very bad day because it's going to be very difficult to get out. So just line up the slot with your pin, just like so, and then go ahead and tighten down your screw until you see the gap close right here. Okay. And there we go. So one of these axles and hub assembly is done, and we can move on to the next one. All right, so now we can assemble the hub with the axle height here and the camber position up here. So we're going to need two 2mm shims. They are 3 by 6 by 2. And then we're going to need these aluminum pieces here. And there is a direction to this because one side has a bevel and the other side is flat. So the bevel is going to be facing upward when you assemble this. So we're going to also need M3 by 12 millimeter screws. And since these are going to be going into aluminum, I'm going to add a little bit of blue Loctite. So the way it's going to be installed is the screws are going to be coming in from the stub axle side, you're going to have the aluminum 2mm spacers, and then you're going to have your aluminum piece with that bevel facing upward. There's an alternate direction where you can flip it, but this is the kit setup. And just snug it up and it should be good. Since there's Loctite on it, it shouldn't back off. So next we need some more pills. We're going to be using to install in the hubs are these. They have a hole that's going through, unlike the ones that are used for the control arms on the inside of the control arm. So we need to utilize the ones that have the hole in the center and off to one side. So for example, we have these three. This hole is in the center. We want to use this one, which is in the center, but off to one side, not in the corner like this. So we'll need 2 per side. All right, so you're gonna install this with the pill facing the inside of the car and in the middle on both sides. Next step is to install the mount for the ball studs that are for the Camber Links. So we're going to install it on the rear end of the car. So if you have the optional sway bar, it goes in here, and I do not. So installs like that. And you're gonna need 2 M3x16 screws, which are the longest screws that are left over. And they're gonna go in these holes. And you're going into plastic, so you don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it's snugged up, it's good. So I did notice that when tightening this down, the gap between this part and the transmission did close up. So once it's snug, you're good. And since we screwed into the transmission, we want to make sure that nothing is bound up, and it's not, so you can continue. Now we're going to need the shims off of these trees. So we need the 2mm shim and the 1mm shim. Next, we're gonna prep the hinge pins, and we're gonna do the same thing that we did with the inner hinge pins, is we're gonna polish them. All right, these feel much smoother than they did before. So now we can install the hinge pin. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna install the hinge pin first, then we're going to install the 2mm spacer, the 1mm spacer, and then the hub itself. There we go. Next, we're going to take two M2.5 by 4 millimeter screws using a 1.5 millimeter driver and screw in to the hole next to the outer hinge pin. And the head of the bolt here should prevent the hinge pin from coming out. So basically tighten until it shoulders up and it's good. And do the same thing on this side. Once it's shouldered, it's good. Still moves nice and free. That's exactly what we want. Now we can do the other side the same way. Now that that's installed, we can prepare the camber links. So we're going to need all 4 of these. On the carpet car, the thread is going to be 8 millimeters long. Okay, so using a shock tool, you can put the ball into the ball studs. The side where the square profile is, where you can put your wrench on, is going to be right hand threaded, and on this side is supposed to be left hand threaded. And for the carpet car, we need 36 millimeters from shoulder to shoulder. So that's 36. We need to go in quite a bit more. So these are now ready to install. So first thing I'd recommend is getting your axles into the drive cups, like so. We're gonna need the aluminum spacers or shims. You're gonna need the conical shims as well as the flat shims. So on the outside, you're gonna have a flat shim and a conical shim. And the way you want to install all these on your car is having this adjustment facing right side of the car, because you want all the left hand threads to be on the left hand side of the car. So that being said, this one will install on this side. And so I'm first putting on a conical washer with the large portion facing down and the small portion facing up, and then just a flat washer. And since it's going to go into aluminum here, I'm going to add a little bit of Loctite. And it is a 2 millimeter hex. So tighten down and then just give it a little bit more because it's going into aluminum. And then on the inside, the initial setting is all the way in. So there's one on the outside and one on the inside. You're going to use the one on the inside. And you're going to install one conical washer. No Loctite needed because this is plastic. And just shoulder it up and it's good. Everything seems to be moving freely. Now we can move on to this side. So remember, the adjustment portion is going to be facing the right side of the car. So on the inside, we're going to just install one conical washer. on the hub side, we're going to install one conical washer and one flat washer. And since it's going into aluminum, I will add a small dab of blue Loctite. There we go. And everything moves nice and smooth, exactly the way that you want it. That concludes step 3 for the rear drivetrain. Please let me know down in the comments if you have any suggestions. I think that the rear wing mount should be applied later or installed later, so I'm going to take a note of that. Other than that, everything else went pretty smoothly. Please let me know if you have any suggestions on this section of the build, not just for me but for other people. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you found it helpful, please like and subscribe. Please stay tuned for the next video where I complete step 4, the front assembly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.